Well, hello everybody. So welcome to this part 3 of our terrain material land series. And with this part, we'll be looking at tessellation. So in order to do that, there's a couple of things that we need to do. First of all, each one of our material functions is going to need to have some kind of detail on the tessellation added, as well as some small edits, as well as our master material. So in our master material, there's going to be another node here for layer blend for the height, and that's going to feed into our world displacement along with some tessellation multiplier. And the tessellation multiplier will be will also have control over distance tessellation. So based on your character's position, you can determine how far you want the terrain to be tessellated. All right, let's get to it. So first of all, I'm going to be starting with the material functions, and so I'm going to do everything kind of from 0 to hero, so to speak. So you'll kind of get the length of the process. Once I do one of these, you can probably skip on to the next part of the video, skip over the other material functions. All right, let's start this off by one of the things that we're going to be able to remove is we're going to be using landscape coordinates. So that's going to replace our texture coordinates here. And also we're going to be simplifying this by removing this bump offset and feeding our new UVs into our textures here. There we go. So that's one of the changes. The other change is going to be our displacement. So in order to do that, we will need a couple more of these scalar nodes. So I'm just going to duplicate this. So first of all, this one's going to be our displacement height. So let's call this displacement height. And now remember, the height power here and the height multiplied, this is used for our blend between the different layers. So we'll leave this separate. Okay, so our displacement height, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply this with our displacement. So multiply, and let's connect these two up. Now, this could be pretty much it at this point, but we want to make this a little nicer. So what we'll do is actually add a way to kind of fade between the different layers. So in order to do that, we're just going to use a divide, and let's duplicate this scalar here. So this one's going to be called fade, and what we're going to do is subtract from our height. So basically this is going to be the fade amount between two layers. So the bigger this number will be, the greater the transition, so to speak. So or actually I think it will be the other way around. So we'll get this in. And now the last thing that we want to do to control our height is going to be on offset. So what this one's going to do is going to offset the entire layer of our layer. So basically our for example, if you want to do the swamp water, you might want to do that at a different offset than say the mossy terrain. So the swamp water might be lower than the mossy terrain. So that's what this is going to serve. So this one is going to be the displacement offset, and we'll just add these together like so. And finally, what we need to do is our world vertex normal. So vertex, I think it's actually how do you spell this in? Vertex normal, I thought that was, oh actually this is not a, what was I thinking? This is a separate node, so vertex normal, there we go. And we're just going to multiply these two. So multiply with that, and this one will end up into our world displacement. So we can go ahead and comment this as displacement, just so we can easily copy it and move it to the other material function. Okay, so not a whole lot of change has happened to these. Let's do the other ones. This one was rocky ground. Now let's do swamp water. So we'll start off with the landscape layer coordinates. Let's plug it into there. There is 1, 2, and 3. As you can see, it doesn't really take that long. It is a little bit of repetitive work now that we've added this new functionality. Okay, and the other thing is going to be our displacement section. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it in here. Alright, so we have the swamp water. Let's do wet sand. And since I already had that, paste that in. Just going to do that real quick. And let's bring that into mossy ground as well, since we're on the displacement section here. Okay, let's do our landscape coordinates. Landscape layer coordinates. Put that in here. Remove these two. So we have UVs, UVs, and UVs. We've already added our displacement. Let's save this one. And let's do the same for mossy ground, and that will be it for our material functions. So we have UVs, UVs, and UVs. Perfect. And that's the material function section of this video. Alright, let's move on to our master material. So this one is actually going to be just as easy. There's kind of the repetitive aspect of adding these in, so that shouldn't take too long. Let's remove, kind of clean up some of these unused nodes. And did I save the swamp water, or this one is referencing a different one actually? Let's make sure that I'm using the correct swamp water, since I've done a few trials of this. So there we go. That's better. Alright, so that looks like everything is in place. Now what I'll do is I'll just duplicate this. Basically it's going to be the same as before with our layer blend, and this one I'm going to be calling displacement. Okay, so before I start connecting these, let's take a look at our material properties here. So one thing that I'm going to need to turn on is this tessellation mode. I'm going to be setting it to flat tessellation, and also what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to leave adaptive tessellation on. I just wanted to show you a quick issue that I ran into when this is turned on. So let's go ahead and kind of connect some of this stuff here. So we have, first of all, mossy ground. Let's start with the mossy ground, and for that we're going to need, try and make this, give this a little bit more space. So we have our world displacement for mossy ground, and we have our height for our blending. Then we have swamp water, which is next, and let's grab displacement. and height. Layer sand is, or I guess the wet sand is going to be world displacement in here, and our height, just like before. Okay, so now the last thing is going to be our layer of rocky ground. So in order to do that, I'm just going to do like before. I'm going to duplicate one of these lerp nodes. And for this one, I've noticed that vertex normal is what works for this height. So the rest is simple. World displacement for our rocky ground and world displacement for our mossy ground. And that goes into our rocky ground layer. Now this one, we'll just plug it into world displacement, and that should be that for this for our nodes. Let's go ahead and do kind of a little bit of the grunt work of plugging in some values here. So just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to be calling it, this one's going to be displacement height. And let's set the default value to 10. Okay, apologies about that. Alright, so let's plug this one in. I'm just going to duplicate this node and call it, this one's going to be our displacement, if I could spell, displacement. So this is going to be the displacement fade. Fade. So let's plug this one in. I'm going to be setting this one to maybe 0.5. So displacement fade, and then this one's going to be the offset. As I was saying, the offset is how high or low, or like how far up or down we're going to move our specific material layer. So let's plug that in there, and the offset, let's set this one, I'm just going to leave it as 1 for default because we're going to change it based on what layer we're on. Okay, so with that said, I am actually going to do this because displacement takes quite a bit of time to type in, and I want the same values. So we got the height, we got the fade, and we got the offset. And let's make sure we assign this to the right. This one's mossy ground. There we go. And let's call it mossy. A lot less to type there. And mossy. Same thing for this. There we go. Alright, then we're almost there. Let's use these down here, and again, this is misspelled, so my apologies. Alright, so we have height and fade and offset, and let's call this, make sure this is swamp water. Swamp water. And also that we have it in the right group. And swamp water. And last one. Height, fade, and offset. One thing you can do is you could also add these as scalar parameters in your functions. So instead of having these kind of input, what you would do is you would just add a regular scalar, but you would have to make sure that you give it a proper name. So this one would be, for example, wet sand displacement height and wet sand displacement fade. So that way they're not overlapping with the other material functions if you name them the same. Naming them like this, I could just completely copy and paste the different material function, and these would not have to change. So that's another option that you have. Okay, so we have swamp water here, and this one is actually wet sand. So let's call that wet sand. Wet sand, then we have wet sand again, and wet sand. Okay, so now we have every parameter that we need for our displacement, but we're not going to have anything happening because we don't have any value for our tessellation. So basically, in our tessellation multiplier, there's nothing there, so we can't really do anything. Okay, well, so as I was saying earlier, what we're going to do is we're going to do a distance-based tessellation. So in order to do that, we need a couple of nodes. We're going to need a camera position, so camera position, as well as an absolute world position, so world position. So what we're going to do is we're going to subtract these. So we're going to subtract our world position from our camera position. And from there, we're going to, in order to get that distance, we're going to need a vector length. Vector length. As you can see, that provides us with two vectors, v3 and a v2, and we're going to use the v3 because that's a positioning vector more likely. So in order for us to actually set that how far from our player we want the terrain to be tessellated, we're going to be using this, and we're going to use a subtract. And here we're going to be providing our tessellation distance. So for default, I've set this one to 5,000. That's kind of the number that I went with. Then let's go ahead and do a division. So and this one kind of works like our and if you remember in our material functions, we used the divide node to actually add a fade to our displacement. And we're going to do that the same for the tessellation. So let's go ahead and duplicate this one, and this one's going to be tessellation fade. And this one we could probably, let's start setting it at 2. Alright. We're going to go ahead and clamp this. And one thing that we need to do is, like, this node at the moment is going to be just black. So we want to do an invert. So we're going to use a -1. And from here, we're going to need to plug this into tessellation multiplier. But we also want to give the ability of, setting that how tessellated our terrain is. So basically, how many polygons we're pushing in. So we're going to use a lerp node, and actually this one needs to go into alpha, and we need a. I didn't want to do that. So this one's going to be our tessellation multiplier, and I'm going to set it to start off at 10. That value actually worked pretty well for me. And no, I did not want to do a comment right now. I just want to add. I'm not sure what the shortcut for constant is, but I'm just going to right click and add a constant of 0. So basically, when this one is 0, there's going to be we're going to be able to lerp between the 0 and 10. And let's add that into our tessellation multiplier. And with that being added in, that should be all set for now. But remember, we started off, and one thing that I wanted to show you was leaving this adaptive tessellation checked. So I'm going to hit save. There's going to be some shaders that are going to compile. so bear with me for just a second there. Actually, not that many. I expected to be quite a few more. Okay, so let's take a look at our wireframes. There we go. We have tessellation going, right? And let's take a look at our instance here. Let me try and drag that out and hopefully fit it into our screen here. I'm not entirely sure if I can dock it. I might just need to drag it in as a window and place it right there. Okay, so one thing that we'll notice, let's take a look at one of our materials first. So I think what I'm going to start with is the wet sand, because this one is pretty much the kind of the more obvious candidate for something that's tessellated. And let's play around with some of the values here. Okay. So let's start with the displacement height maybe, and try and change this to 50. As you can see, that's already pretty strong looking kind of bumpiness happening. And for the offset, maybe we'll do, let's do a 510, 40 maybe. Okay, so I kind of wanted this one to be a little bit lower than my moss area. Now, if you remember, we were just talking about one of the issues that we might encounter with this. And let's take a look if we can find an issue area. Where would that be? Hopefully, there we go. If you look closely, like right here, there's like a kind of a crack in the landscape, and that becomes more obvious if I kind of pump this up a little bit more. So let's do maybe 100 to get a even higher tessellation. So as you can see, like look at this. This is like a huge crack there. You know, they keep on happening here. You'll notice them like around here and here and over here. This is pretty large. So in order to account for that, what I've done is actually in my master material, I went about and I turned off this adaptive tessellation option, because we already handled that through these options here. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And let's see if we still get those cracks in the material now. So very few shaders to compile, which is great. Sometimes I'm not sure why it goes into negative. Not sure how that counts work, but all right by me. All right, so let's take a look if we still have those issues. So as you can see, I cannot seem to find those issues anymore, like those really large kind of openings in the terrain. And remember, this is a pretty exaggerated tessellation value that I've set for this at the moment. It's kind of, you know, I wouldn't say it's very realistic. So I'm gonna, I think 60 or 50 was, we can probably bump it up to 70. Was working kind of okay for this this surface in itself. Okay, well, so that's one of them. Let's go ahead and try and do a little bit of painting. I think we can like kind of bump the offset up a little bit. Let's see, probably about to there. Let's paint some swamp water maybe. So it's going to be some compilation happening every time I paint one of these. So, and the swamp water, if you can see, it already has like our default setting, and let's play around with some of its values. So let's do the displacement offset and the height. So displacement offset, I think we can set this to maybe 30. I mean, there is some things of, you can get some detail on the surface of this, like for example, these little you know, like weeds or things that I believe they're weeds that are on it. I mean, if you set it to 0, did I? Oh, I changed the wrong one. So let's take a look. We can see this is, let's try and change this to 0 for the displacement height. Oh, I believe that's actually mostly just in the normal. So we might just as well leave it at 10. But let's change the offset so it's somewhere lower than our maybe even lower. So we're going to try and put it, kind of place it somewhere below our wet sand, muddy kind of surface. Maybe minus 30, minus 50. I think that should be pretty good there. There we go. That's pretty nice. So now if we were to paint some of the wet sand, you can see how that is kind of coming in and lifting some of that terrain. Now you can adjust some of the transition by playing around with the height, power, and multiplier. So let's try about 0.5. That's a little bit too much. There we go. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's actually kind of nice. That transition to our, you know, it blends in quite nicely with the rest of it. Maybe a little too much. So let's see. I think that's a little bit better. There we go. So it blends in, you know, you kind of see the bumpiness starting over there, but then kind of transitions into this, into the muddy ground over there. So that's pretty nice. Let's take a look at one of the things that I wanted to mention was, and what I've been playing with is, as you can see, some of these materials can get kind of noisy. And one of the things that I've done is actually I've reduced the tiling a little bit more on them. So that way you can get a little bit more detail from the height map is what I would think. You know, you have to be kind of careful with that. Right now these textures are at, let me do a quick save. Right now these textures are at 2K. So, you know, you want to, you might want to try and be, you know, pretty careful with you know, how you handle the tiling. You know, you don't want to go too low or too high with it. So kind of a happy medium, I would say, is would be great to be able to find. Okay, so that's part of it. Let's take a look at you know, kind of playing with some of the values for some of the other layers. So let's do the mossy ground. So let's try and do this one to 50 as well. And let's play with the offset as well. Okay, that's actually a pretty good offset, and you get some of the you know, kind of the bumpiness of the rocks. And to our last one is our rocky surface. So let's see, where did I put that? A rocky ground, there we go. So let's make this maybe 50. Let's do 100. I think this one can benefit from a higher value, just because it's got I think a pretty obvious, if we were to look at the rocky ground, its displacement is pretty obvious. So I kind of like that, you know, kind of these stronger shapes in there. So that would give a pretty good look. So yeah, and that looks pretty nice. And let's play around with the offset a little bit just to kind of bring it back to where it was. There we go. So And that's actually creating a pretty nice transition there. There it is. Nice. And as you can see, with the ability to control the distance and the fade, you can once you move away, at that point this tessellation is kind of is not happening on that section of the terrain. So that way it makes it look so much, the transition is much smoother that way. And of course you can bump these values and play around with them as much as you like. It's totally up to you. To me, I think these work out pretty well. But like I said, you can play with the tessellation distance and kind of make that smaller, and you only get it to about here, which is really small. So there you go. It's just extended to this, and oh, that's actually 1,000 what I wanted to try. But like I said, I've seen that 5,000 seems to be pretty good. So I guess somewhere between anything over about 1,000 or 2,000 should be pretty well once you're gonna have this covered with some vegetation and so on. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this video. So hopefully you guys enjoy it, and yeah, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.